The science of enlightenment. Explained simply, what if I told you that enlightenment isn't a mystical state reserved for monks? It's a specific, measurable shift in brain function that neuroscience can now document, predict, and even replicate. Your brain has the fundamental modes: the default mode where you're lost in thought, planning, worrying, remembering, and the awakened mode where thought quiets and direct awareness dominates. Enlightenment is the permanent shift from spending 90% of your time in default mode to spending most of your time in awakened awareness. This isn't spiritual mysticism nonsense. This is hard science. Researchers at Yale, Harvard Medical School, and the Max Planck Institute have identified the exact neural correlates of enlightenment. Dr. Judson Brewer's research shows that experienced meditators demonstrate persistent changes in the default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-referential thinking. When this network quiets permanently, what traditions call enlightenment emerges. Ancient contemplatives described enlightenment as awakening, liberation, or realization. Buddhist texts detailed precise stages. Hindu philosophy mapped consciousness states. Zen masters transmitted direct pointing out instructions. They all describe the same neurological transformation modern science now confirms. Enlightenment isn't about acquiring something new. It's about recognizing what's always been here beneath the mental noise. Your brain already has the capacity. It's been obscured by specific patterns of neural activity that contemplative practice systematically dismantles. I'm about to expose 10 scientifically documented mechanisms underlying enlightenment, not belief systems, but actual neurological processes you can understand and engage. Each technique reveals a different aspect of the brain transformation that creates persistent awakened awareness. Your enlightenment isn't mystical, it's neurological. Time to understand the science. Part 1. The default mode deactivation. You spend most of your waking life in the default mode network, the brain system that generates self-referential thought, mental time travel, and the narrative sense of me. Neuroscientist Marcus Reichel discovered the DMN it activates when you're not focused on external tasks, generating the internal monologue that most people mistake for consciousness itself. Enlightenment involves persistent DMN downregulation, allowing awareness without constant self-referential narration. This is technique number 1 out of 10, the default mode. DEACTIVATION. Practice 20 minutes daily of focused attention meditation for 90 consecutive days. Choose one object, breath, sound, or visual point. When your mind wanders to thoughts, DMN activating, notice it immediately and return attention to the object. Count mind wandering instances per session. Over weeks, notice the gaps between thoughts lengthening. This is DMN quieting. Track gap duration weekly. The DMN is your brain self-simulator. It constantly generates the sense of me through memory, projection, and narrative. When you repeatedly redirect attention away from thought to present moment experience, the DMN's habitual dominance weakens. You're training your brain to operate with less self-referential processing. Research shows that experienced meditators demonstrate 40 to 50% reduced DMN activity during and between meditation sessions. The network's grip loosens. Start systematic DMN deactivation training and watch the constant internal monologue quiet as your brain learns to operate without obsessive self-reference. Part 2. The present moment anchoring. Your mind spends 47% of waking hours thinking about something other than what you're currently doing. This habitual absence from the present is the opposite of enlightenment. Psychologist Matt Killingsworth's research using real-time experience sampling proves that mind-wandering correlates with unhappiness regardless of what you're wandering to. Enlightenment is the capacity to remain in present moment awareness without constant psychological time travel. This is technique number 2 out of 10. The present moment anchoring. Set random phone alarms 8 times daily for 60 consecutive days. When the alarm sounds, immediately ask, where was my attention? If you were lost in thought about past or future, note it. Then spend 60 seconds in complete sensory presence. Notice sight, sound, sensation, smell, taste. Track daily what percentage of alarm checks find you present versus mentally absent. Watch this ratio shift over time. Your brain's temporal orientation circuits constantly pull attention into psychological past and future. Repeated practice returning to present moment sensory experience strengthens neural pathways, supporting sustained presence. You're retraining attentional habits from chronic mental time travel to stable presence. Studies show that present moment Awareness reduces activity in brain regions associated with rumination and anxiety. Presence itself is therapeutic. Start present moment, anchoring practice, and watch chronic mental absence transform into sustained presence as attention retraining accumulates. Part 3. The self-construct recognition. You experience yourself as a solid, continuous entity, a me that persists through time. Neuroscience reveals this is a constructed illusion your brain generates. Neuroscientist Thomas Metzinger's research on the phenomenal self model demonstrates that your sense of self is a brain-generated simulation, a useful fiction for navigating social reality, but not an actual entity. Enlightenment involves recognizing this construction as construction. This is technique number 3 out of 10, the self-construct recognition, for 75 consecutive days. Practice self-inquiry for 15 minutes daily. Repeatedly ask, who am I? And investigate direct experience. Don't answer with concepts, name, history, roles. Look for the actual entity you call I in present awareness. Notice you can't find it, only more observed content, thoughts, sensations, perceptions appears. The observer seeking itself can't be found. Document this investigation weekly. Your brain constructs a coherent sense of self from disparate processes: memory, sensation, perception, thought. When you search for the self directly, it can't be located because it's a process, not an entity. You're using investigation to experientially recognize that the solid self you believe you are is actually a dynamic process. Research on self-referential processing shows it's constructed by a specific brain. Networks change the networks. The self-experience changes. Start systematic self-inquiry and watch the solid self reveal itself as constructed process rather than fixed entity through direct investigation. Part 4. The observer-observed collapse. You experience a split between the observer you and observe your experience. This dualistic structure is what enlightenment collapses into. Non-dual awareness. Neuroscientist Zoran Josipovic's research on non-dual awareness shows that advanced practitioners demonstrate reduced distinction between self-referential network and experience processing networks. The observer-observed split is neurologically constructed and can dissolve. This is technique number 4 out of 10, the observer-observed collapse. Practice 25 minutes daily for 100 consecutive days investigating. Is there actually a boundary between awareness and what I'm aware of? Don't answer conceptually. Look directly at experience. Notice that seeing, hearing, sensing happened, but can you find a separate seer, hearer, or sensor? Observe that there's experiencing without findable experiencer. Journal weekly on shifts in subject-object structure. Your brain maintains self-world boundaries through specific processing in parietal and prefrontal regions. Non-dual awareness emerges. When this boundary making quiets, there's experience without the sense of someone having experience. You're training direct recognition of awareness. Without the subject-object split, studies show that non-dual awareness correlates with specific brain signatures. Reduce self-other distinction at neural level. Start investigating. Observe boundaries and watch dualistic perception dissolve into non-dual awareness as the constructed split reveals itself. Part 5. The thought identity disidentification. Believe you are your thoughts, that the voice in your head is you. Enlightenment is recognizing thoughts as objects appearing in awareness, not what you are. Psychologist Stephen Hayes' research on cognitive diffusion shows that creating distance from thoughts reduces their emotional impact. Enlightenment is permanent diffusion. Thoughts lose their compelling authority because you recognize you're not them. This is technique number 5 out of 10, the thought identity disidentification, for 80 consecutive days. Practice thought labeling. Every time you notice a thought, label it in third person. There's a thought about work. There's a worry about money. There's a memory of yesterday. Never I'm thinking about work. Always there's a thought about work. Notice the distance this language creates. Practice this 50+ times daily. Track how thoughts' emotional grip weakens over time. Identification with thoughts occurs when you believe you're the thinker generating them. Consistent third-person labeling creates psychological distance. You become the awareness noticing thoughts rather than the thinker thinking them. You're retraining identification patterns from fusion with content to recognition of content as object. Research shows that diffusion language reduces thought believability by 30 to 40%. Linguistic distance creates psychological distance. Start systematic thought labeling and watch identification. with mental content dissolve as thoughts become obviously separate from awareness. Part 6. The emotional transparency cultivation. Emotions feel opaque, mysterious forces that happen to you. Enlightenment brings emotional transparency, recognizing emotions as temporary patterns of sensation and thought, not solid facts. Neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Baer's theory of constructed emotion proves that emotions aren't universal reactions. They're predictions your brain makes from bodily sensations plus context. This construction process becomes visible with practice. This is technique number 6 out of 10, the emotional transparency cultivation. When strong emotions arise over 50 consecutive instances, immediately deconstruct them. 1. Describe pure physical sensations. For 30 seconds, tightness in chest, heat in face, tension in shoulders. 2. Notice the thoughts interpreting these sensations because they disrespected me. 3. Recognize that sensation plus interpretation equals emotion. See the construction process. Document how this deconstruction affects emotional intensity and duration. Emotions feel monolithic until you separate bodily sensation from cognitive interpretation. Your brain fuses these components so rapidly they seem unified. Systematic deconstruction makes visible the constructed nature of emotion. Sensation is one thing. The story about sensation is another. You're developing the capacity to see emotions, assembling in real time. Studies show that separating sensation from interpretation reduces emotional intensity by 40%. Construction. Recognition weakens reactivity. Start emotional deconstruction practice and watch. Emotions become transparent processes rather than opaque forces as you see their constructed nature. Part 7. The suffering resistance. Connection. You believe external circumstances cause suffering. They don't. Suffering comes from resisting what is arguing with reality through mental resistance. Psychologist Stephen Hayes' research underlying acceptance and commitment therapy proves that psychological suffering correlates with experiential avoidance, resisting unwanted internal experiences. Enlightenment involves recognizing that pain is inevitable. Suffering resistance to pain is optional. This is technique number 7 out of 10, the suffering resistance connection. For 70 consecutive days, practice radical acceptance of present moment experience. When discomfort arises, physical, emotional, situational, notice the urge to resist, to wish it were different. Instead, for 2 minutes, completely accept it. This is what's here now. Don't try to fix, change, or escape, just allow it completely. Document what happens to suffering when resistance stops versus when resistance continues. Your brain generates suffering by fighting present reality. This shouldn't be happening. I can't handle this. This is wrong. Suffering is the gap between what is and what you demand should be. Acceptance collapses this gap. What remains is direct experience, without the added layer of resistance. You're discovering that suffering is optional. Mental activity added to unavoidable pain. Research shows that acceptance-based interventions reduce psychological distress more effectively than avoidance strategies. Resistance itself generates suffering. Start practicing radical acceptance and watch suffering decrease dramatically as you recognize it emerges from resistance, not circumstances. Part 8. The awareness continuity recognition. You think consciousness comes and goes. You're conscious when awake, unconscious when asleep. Enlightenment reveals that awareness is continuous. What changes is content, not awareness itself. Neuroscientist Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory suggests consciousness is a fundamental property. Advanced practitioners report that awareness becomes recognizable as continuous even through sleep. Content changes but awareness persists. This is technique number 8 out of 10, the awareness continuity recognition. For 90 consecutive days, practice recognizing awareness itself rather than awareness's contents. Multiple times daily, shift attention from what you're aware of to awareness itself, the space in which experience appears. Ask, what is aware right now? Notice that awareness is always present regardless of changing content. Keep a nightly journal documenting any recognition of awareness persisting through sleep or dreams. Normally you identify with content, thoughts, sensations, perceptions. When you learn to recognize awareness itself, you discover it's constant while content is variable. Awareness is like the screen on which all experience plays, always present, often overlooked. You're training attention to recognize the unchanging background rather than only the changing foreground. Studies on lucid dreaming show that meta-awareness can persist through sleep. States awareness recognizing itself continues. Start recognizing awareness itself and watch yourself discover the continuous presence beneath all changing experience. Part 9. The effortless being. Discover you. Ray constantly doing, thinking, planning, controlling, striving. Enlightenment reveals effortless being, life living itself through you without the sense of a separate door. Neuroscientist Mark Lewis's research on flow states shows reduced prefrontal cortex activity during peak performance. The executive self quiets, allowing effortless action without self-conscious control. Enlightenment is sustained access to this effortless functioning. This is technique number 9 out of 10, the effortless being discovery, for 85 consecutive days. Practice noticing the difference between forced doing and spontaneous happening. Throughout your day, observe, is this action arising naturally or am I forcing it? When you catch yourself forcing, relax the sense of doorship. Allow actions to emerge rather than controlling them. Notice that life continues, breath breathes, heart beats. Actions occur without a central controller micromanaging everything. Document the difference in energy between forced and effortless action. Your sense of being a Dura separate agent controlling actions is created by narrative self-referential processing. When this processing quiets, actions still occur, but without the exhausting sense of me doing them. You're discovering that life functions perfectly well without the additional burden of constant executive control. Research on expertise shows that peak performance feels effortless. The door gets out of the way. Start distinguishing force from effortless and watch the exhausting sense of constant control dissolve as life lives itself through you. Part 10. The integration embodiment process here is something that will blow your mind. Enlightenment isn't a permanent state you reach and stay. It is the progressive integration of awakened awareness into all areas of life until it becomes your baseline. Psychologist Ken Wilber's developmental models and Shinzen Young's practice maps both emphasize that enlightenment is gradual. Integration insights deepen, stability increases, and awakened awareness extends into more life contexts over time. This is technique number 10 out of 10, the integration embodiment process. Assess integration quarterly using these markers. 1. How often does DMN activation dominate? 2. How much time is spent present versus mentally absent? 3. How identify with thoughts? 4. How much suffering from resistance? 5. How often does effortless being emerge? Rate each 1 to 10. Track progression over 365 days minimum. Notice that integration is gradual. Initial insights deepen, stability increases, and awakened awareness pervades more of life. Enlightenment isn't a single breakthrough, it's the progressive neurological restructuring that makes awakened awareness increasingly stable and pervasive. Initial insights are beginnings, not endings. You're implementing long-term tracking that recognizes enlightenment as developmental process rather than binary achievement. Studies on long-term practitioners show continued development decades into practice. Enlightenment deepens progressively, not instantaneously. Start tracking long-term integration and watch enlightenment reveal itself as gradual embodiment rather than sudden permanent achievement. Closing these 10 mechanisms are mystical processes that the documented neurological and psychological transformations underlying what contemplative traditions call enlightenment. You're not seeking a magical state. You're systematically training your brain to operate differently. Default mode deactivation quiets self-referential thinking. Present moment anchoring ends chronic mental absence. Self-construct recognition reveals the self as process. Observer-observed collapse dissolves subject-object dualism. Thought identity disidentification ends fusion with mental content. Emotional transparency cultivation reveals emotions as constructed. Suffering resistance connection shows resistance generates suffering. Awareness continuity recognition finds unchanging background. Effortless being discovery reveals action without actor. Integration embodiment process maps gradual deepening. Ancient contemplatives discovered these transformations through systematic introspection. Buddhist psychology detailed the path. Advaita Vedanta described the recognition. Zen provided direct pointing. They all map the same territory modern neuroscience now confirms with brain imaging. Enlightenment isn't mystical, it's the natural result of specific, trainable brain changes. The default mode network quiets. Self-referential processing decreases. Present moment awareness stabilizes. Non-dual recognition emerges. Integration deepens progressively. Your transformation doesn't start tomorrow or next week. It starts the moment you begin your first focused attention session. It starts when you set your first present moment anchor alarm. It starts when you label your next thought in third person.